So, Godfrey Uzoigwe is an African history specialist. He's currently Professor of History in Mississippi State University. He received his DPhil degree from Christ Church in Oxford, or the House, as I gather. People like himself call it, in 19th century British history. He's also a student. We can lay certain claim to him. He's a student at UCD in Trinity College, Dublin, prior to his time in Oxford. He's widely published, and he has taught at several universities and has held distinguished visiting appointments at the University of Nigeria, Nazuka, I'm sure I've mispronounced that, at Cornell University, Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and Tulane University. His forthcoming book is entitled Visions of Nationhood, Prelude to the Nigerian Civil War, and will be published by Africa World Press, Trenton, New Jersey. His topic today is on the prelude to the war, and I am reliably informed, authoritatively informed, that he's an excellent speaker. My authority is Fiona Bateman. She's heard him speak. Godfrey.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know how long I speak for, but when I'm tired, everybody's tired, I sit down and we continue with the question and answers. I've been in Ireland now for 7 days. When it was announced that I was going to speak, she took over. This is my wife, and I had all sorts of things planned for us. I've been visiting all sorts of places in Ireland, and I've been spoiled rotten by the Irish. And it was, it brought back pleasant memories, of my days at UCD in the 60s, and the Trinity College, and Blackrock, which I would have loved to visit, but I don't have time. I taught there in 1964, I think. I taught them Irish history and Latin, before, going to. Well, the subject today is something that I started working on, off and on, since 1969. When Mike and others were in Biafra fighting or propagating whatever they were doing, I was out there dying in silence because I really couldn't do much except to talk and give lectures and do things like that. Then I decided to begin a book to ask why. What was all this war all about? What is the purpose of government? What is a state? And why should I, as an individual, obey it? That is how the book started. I finished that theoretical, philosophical aspect of the book, and then the war ended in our disfavor. And everybody was now running helter-skelter, excuse me. It was... reluctantly, I found myself in the United States, in the University of Michigan. And there we grew up, more or less. And at the end of it all, I dragged the poor woman back to Nigeria, to serve, because I left Nigeria before independence. And we spent, I don't know how many years, and then we decided to come back to the United States when I wrote off Nigeria as a bad case, because we tried the best we could to get that country, going. These preliminary remarks are important because I have a favorite British historian, a man called Carr, Edward Hallett Carr. He wrote a small little book that is very influential, and it's called What is History? Let me paraphrase some of the things that I found interesting in that book. he said, study the historian before you study the facts. That's what he says. When you read a work of history, first listen out for the buzzing. If you can detect none, two things are possible. You are either tone deaf or your historian is a dull dog. And when I'm through with you, you will decide whether I am a dull dog, and then I will decide whether you are tone deaf. And then he says, what are historical facts? There is a place called Ireland, right? That fought for separation from Britain, right? And in 1925, there was partition, I think, 25 or 26? Okay, whatever. Partition, north, south, fact. There was a place called Biafra. Nigeria, sorry. And a place called Eastern Nigeria, that separated from Biafra. Fact. Then there's something called evidence. And that's where the historian comes in. The evidence then would be, why did Eastern Nigeria separate, from the whole of Nigeria and called itself Biafra, at least for a while? Now, I have been doing other things since I started writing this book, or writing all sorts of things. Why I find my situation fascinating is that I come into this topic, as it were, from outside. I wasn't there. My first area of work wasn't in African history at all. All the things I studied at UCD and Trinity and Christ Church, Oxford, there was nobody who knew African history to teach me any African history. So my area of history is early European history, precisely British history in the 19th century. And to prove it, I did a fat book on the third Marquis of Salisbury. He was the British Prime Minister at the close, of the 19th century. So looking at this subject from somebody born in Biafra and somebody who wasn't there, and then I started doing some poking around myself. And I've studied the period from 1960 to 1967, which is the topic of this book. I've also studied the period from 1970 to Abdul Salam Abubakar. Darling, may I have that book, please? And then we did a book called Troubled Journey, Nigeria since the Civil War. What we try to do here, or what we did here, was to take the Nigerian regimes from Gawan after the war until the beginning of Obasanjo's tenure. And we took the regime, critiqued them regime by regime. Now, whether this book made some impact or not, I haven't got the faintest idea. What I do is I write and leave the others to talk whatever they want to talk about, and I move on to other things. The Romans verba scripta manet. The written word, will remain in the end. If this generation does not judge you well, maybe the next generation may judge you, well. But unfortunately, the area that I haven't studied at all is the period all of you have done. 1967 to 1970. I have done no work, in this area. And I'm too scared even to try, because as a historian, I do not talk about what I don't know. I don't talk about what I don't know. So why did Biafra then declare its independence? Well, I said, well, there are several reasons. The most popular reason, which I discount, and I don't use in my book, is that it was about oil. I checked through the records. Nobody talked about oil in the documents the Biafrans provided and the documents that the Nigerians provided. And these documents are reproduced in my book. The Abuja, Aburi agreements, and the Addis Ababa documents, and the one you people prepared, the document to the United Nations about genocide, and things like that. But the popular thing was that Biafra, Eastern Nigeria, declared itself independent because he wanted to control the oil. I said, no, history does not really operate this way. Let me read to you just a page of my book. Not even a page. And after that, I will not look at this again. You may agree or not agree with me. I start this by quoting an emperor, Roman emperor, Publius Aelius Hadrianus. You know him as Hadrian, the one who built the big wall, who had pretensions of being an intellectual, or things like that. And then he wrote, historians propose to us systems too perfect for explaining the past, with sequence of cause and effect much too exact and clear to have been entirely true. They rearrange what is dead, unresisted material, and I know that even Plutarch will never recapture Alexander the Great. The reason why I'm doing this is, I'm one of those historians who arrange all this dead, something fact. I may not recreate everything, but at least I will push across to you some impressions. And then I wrote, any pessimist, what is salt? And who, furthermore, is a student of Nigerian colonial history, would have predicted that the euphoria witnessed after Nigeria became an independent nation state on October 1, 1960 would, sooner than later, evaporate under the apparent unity that was enjoyed throughout the land would eventually unhinge under the harsh realities of indigenous rulership. That's why I began the book. The future then would be anybody's guess. On the other hand, a cockeyed optimist, who is equally a student of the same history, would have predicted that the country's unity would hold up despite anticipated ups and downs, themselves essentially the product of historical forces, and that Nigeria would live up to its expectation of emerging as the giant of Africa, the pride of the black world, and a force in world politics. However, a clear-headed realist, who is also equally a keen student of the country's history and culture and politics, would have cautioned that because a lot of water had percolated under the Nigerian bridge for over 60 years, the foundation of Nigerian unity had become suspect, and that the great Nigerian edifice erected by Frederick Daltrey Lugard and others, would require careful and patient re-engineering to ensure that it would not collapse. But given Nigeria's uncanny ability to always bend but never break, all might be well. The future then was filled with uncertainties. If a hypothetical pessimist, optimist, and realist were alive today, 2010, each would claim, with some justification, that their predictions were correct. But one thing that no one anticipated was the depth of ill feeling the Igbo generated among their own countrymen and countrywomen that made possible the genocide committed against them, mark my dates, between May and October 1966, the event that caused the Igbo to form the Republic of Biafra in 1967. Whether that ill feeling, and some would say a hatred, was deserved or not is a matter of subjective opinion. That is how looking at it, historically, I made no mention of oil and made no mention of all these sort of things. Now people have their own opinions. As soon as Nigeria became independent, one thing became clear, that the Western Nigeria, that's Yoruba land, were restive because they were not part of the political calculus. They were aged out of power. The East and the North formed a kind of government, coalition government. I looked into this carefully and discovered actually that Awolowo was playing a double game. He wanted to form a government with Azikiwe of the Eastern region, and if he did, they would have enough majority to rule the country. But he was willing to serve as a second in command. We found out that Awolowo also sent two delegations, one to Enugu and one to, what's the capital? Kaduna, offering to be deputy, what do they call it? Deputy Prime Minister to Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. And the two delegations arrived almost simultaneously. But Saudana and Zik were friends. So Saudana took up his phone and called Zik in Enugu and said, "Nnamdi, do you know who I have here in the other room? A delegation from the Yoruba." Zik said, "What are you talking about? I have a delegation from the Yorubas also, all wanting to be my deputy." Why did I get this information? From a Christchurchman, actually, who was one of the British senior officers in the North. What's his name? He wrote a book, The Right Honourable Gentleman. No. I don't know. I never did go to Oxford. This guy, I remember his name. I have his book. It's over 1,000 pages. Because he knew, what was going on. Now, when this arrangement was done, the Yorubas felt that they were aged out of power. And Akintola, who was a deputy to Awolowo in the West, most of you know about him, wanted to a Western-Northern alliance. to edge the Igbos out of power. And then he campaigned the elections on the what he called Igbo platform. He didn't want to talk about the rest of Igbo land, because Igbo land wasn't made up only of Igbos. It was made up of significant, minorities. Now, he portrayed Awolowo as now teaming up with the Igbo people, to suppress the Yoruba, which was nonsense, because Awolowo was the most Yoruba of all the individuals that we know. But he wanted really to form an alliance with the North instead of with the East. But he could not do so as long as his boss was in power, and his boss was Awolowo. So Awolowo and his party saw what he was trying to do and removed him from the deputy premiership, you see. So what did he do? He appealed to the Supreme Court and said that he was removed without any debate on the floor of a parliament. And then they said, okay, you debate. During the debate, Akintola knew that was going to lose. So he hired some thugs. So before the actual vote was taken, the thugs stormed the parliament, and everybody ran away. They were throwing chairs and all these sort of things and caused confusion, so the actual votes were not actually taken. Now, this is not a new maneuver. Those of you who know a bit of Roman history, you know that those brothers, what do we call them, the Tiberius Gracchus, and the same thing happened. They just invaded parliament, scattered everything, and then the governor then was forced to reinstate, what is his name, Akintola as the premier of the eastern region. It's a western region, sorry. It's a long story. But the long and short of it was the Yorubas, and they were crossing to the carpet. The old action group and others were forming into another kind of party. By the time you know it, the NCNC in the East had not become a minority. You see? And Awolowo was Akintola was moving further and further to the north. And the Igbos were now left out on a limb. In the meantime, the coalition government between these individuals was not working. The Igbo had their own idea, what are called visions, of what it meant to be a Nigerian. The Northerners had their own visions and had them laid out in the book, what it meant to be a Nigerian. And, of course, the Westerners, had their own, particular views. So the first reason, then, the beginning of the collapse of the first republic of Nigeria was the formation of a northern western alliance that edged the Igbos out of contention, so to speak, power on the periphery. An interesting thing was that the Igbos were supposed to be part and parcel of the coalition government while these things were happening, Now, while these things were going on, another thing cropped up in Nigerian politics, and that is the first or second national census, in Nigeria, 1962 to 1963, and I call it here a portent of things to come. It was the most bizarre census you will ever hear about in your life. It's a long story of where you counted cows and goats and double voting and what they call migration, something you vote here and then you come back again, you do all these sort of things. It was a useless census in so many ways. And as soon as the results were announced, the Eastern region, now led by Dr. Michael Opara Zik, was now the Governor General, of Nigeria, refused to accept the census. And that was when the trouble started. A major debate in the Northern House of Assembly was, if you read it, you will just weep. There wasn't any name that didn't call the Igbos. We were a people who allowed you to come to our midst, to do business and prosper. You have not shown any gratitude until the Igbos become the majority group in Nigeria. You will not be satisfied. We have to do away with the Igbos. These are languages, things I'm quoting now, but they didn't say what they were going to do, to the Igbos. Now, if you look at that speech, read it well. The enmity, the anger, the frustration that these people had about the Igbos was actually really unbearable, to read. So that was the first crack, the second crack in the foundation of the Nigerian edifice that I was talking about. The Northerners came to the conclusion that of all Nigerians, only the Igbo, people did not like them. The West said nothing. The Eastern minority said nothing. So the Igbos, again, were left out, on a limb. So what do you do in a situation like that? That is the second prelude, to the war. The third prelude to the... I'm sorry I have to rush. I wanted to talk about 30 minutes or something. We can all, join in. Then the federal election, 1964 to 1965. I call it democracy in Nigerian style. Democracy in Nigerian style. When this election was announced, all the pundits, the newspapers, the authors, the Pan-Africanists, the black lovers, and all sorts of things, I said, that's now the great giant is at last awake. He's going to bless the trail of democracy in the whole of Africa. And everybody was actually excited. There was a realignment of forces, here and there. The Northerners who didn't want to contest elections before, now we are moving into the Midwest, the Benin area, Saba area, to, form political parties, which I thought was good. That's what democracy was all about. Before then, the Northerners used to, campaign in the North. You see, Nigeria was really a curious creation. You do not have a federation where one part can go it alone and dominate the rest. Northern Nigeria had 2/3 of the Nigerian landmass. If you saw the map that Fiona showed here, you will see there. They have 50-50 parity, in terms of representation, in parliament. You see. So if you were a northern leader, like an icon of Sardauna status, you did not need to campaign in the West or campaign in the East to win an election. There are other parties in the East that will divide the representation, parties in the West that will divide the representation. So at the end of it, the Northerners will be the largest group, even if they don't control more than 50%. Of the representation. That was why the governor who left Nigeria, I've forgotten his name, the Scottish guy, the last governor. No, Hugh Robertson. It was he who declared Saldana the premier of eastern Nigeria without even informing Whitehall. Because he said, well, I've looked at the results of the election, and the Northerners had more representation than anyone else. And if anybody should rule Nigeria, it will be them. But those of you in political science know that is one of the canons of the discipline, that no part of the federation will be too large that he can go it all alone, among the others. That has been the problem with Nigeria. There is an imaginary line you call North and South, but nobody knows where that line is. Well, I don't want to take you back, but it was a line drawn by British officials, people we call the prancing proconsuls. You see, Lugard was conquering from the north, past the Benue, past the Niger. Carter was moving from Lagos, up north. Who is the other one? Almost a forgotten guy from the east, forgotten his name. He was, conquering, from the Lagos to Iboland. Lugard even threatened to fight Carter if he crossed up the Nile, up the Niger. Can you imagine 3 representatives of one country fighting one another as if they were representing different countries? That's how that line got established. And the Nigerians had, hung on to it as if their lives depended on it. There's a place called Northern Nigeria, a place called Eastern Nigeria, a place called Western Nigeria, all lines drawn by British proconsuls. So this election was really ridiculous election. I call it a shameful show. You can't call it an election at all, in many ways. So, and I have a long chapter on the conduct of the election was so awful. There was no democracy at all. That's what I call it, democracy Nigerian style. Now you go to the polling booth, and then if you are strong enough, you shoot up a few guns in the air, and everybody scatters, and you stuff the distance with the ballots of your own party, and then you make it stick, or something like that. Now that is not, an election. And because Opera was so strident, he was on this kind of democracy crusade. The Northerners felt that the Igbos again have demonstrated that of all Nigerians, only the Igbo were against the interests of the North. The Yoruba, the Western Nigerians said nothing. The Eastern minorities said nothing. The Northerners, of course, was a monolithic group, as it were, except for the few noises made by, what do you call him, Aminu Kano and the Bonu, guys. But they knew their place in the northern hierarchy, and the Saldana would take care of them. And because of the controversy over this national census, the relationship between the North and the Igbos, in particular, deteriorated drastically. That was 1964 to 1965. On top of after that, there was another election, the worst of the lot. The Western Region election, October 1965. And I call it in my book, the Wild, Wild West at it again. The Wild, Wild West at it again. And these individuals started again as something they used to call Operation Wetting. W-I-T-T-I is Nigerian Pidgin English, things like that. Because of the confusion, if they know you belong to a different party, and if you look prosperous and you're in a car, they pour kerosene on your car and demanded money from you. If you didn't give them money, they set it alight. The car, burn you with the car, inside it. So the election was so bizarre. If you the manifestos that I paraphrased in my book were really amazing. It was fought on an anti-Igbo platform by Akintola and his group. Western Yoruba traders traded under the bridge. The Igbos traded in big warehouses. They drew cartoons of prosperous Igbo-looking people in Lagos and hungry-looking Yoruba, people trading with mice and others under the bridge. And Awolowo was blamed for it because he wanted to, So my book has a long, section, captions of it. I wish a friend was this guy, Vickers, Post and Vickers. Post and Vickers have a very, very interesting, good book on this called Politics, Structure and Politics in Nigeria, or something like that, where they produced a lot of goddesses. Now, this election was, the other election, Opera refused to compete. When he knew that it was bizarre, there was no need to compete, so he boycotted it. And the historians now have been talking. Was it wise for him to boycott it or not? That is a federal election Nigerian style. Well, my argument is that it was an election he was bound to lose anyway, because they control the local government police. The federal government police was under the federal government. The Easterners, on the whole, didn't control any police, so they had really no way of ramming down their views on anybody. They couldn't use the police to suppress you. So what Opera did in this case was, okay, let me not legitimize this election by boycotting it. Some historians have argued that he shouldn't have boycotted it. I said he should, because it was a farce. If that was a farce, this election of Western Nigeria was more farcical. People were killed, all sorts of things were done, and I believe that it was as a result of what happened in Western Nigeria and the kind of chaos, that occurred that actually forced the federal, soldiers, to take power. Akintola's son has written a biography of his father, and he supports my position that they used to call his father in Yoruba, I don't know that language, they call him thief because he stole the election. Yes, Ole, yes, Asa Ole, Asa Ole, the thief. He stole the election. And then he didn't have the support of the people, but he had the support of northern Nigerians. So the relationship between the northerners and the westerners were now solidified. The Igbos were kicked out of the, the coalition government. They were now on their own. Then I have here coups and counter-coups. January to July 1966. In January 1966, a group of army officers, young intellectuals corrupted by people like him and others, whatever decided that they had enough. They had enough of this, so they struck and deposed the government of Tafawa Balewa. Everybody, I have accounts of the newspapers in my book. In the Nigerian fashion, everybody praised it as a great thing. Ironsi, who's an Igbo from Umuahia, he was now asked to be the head because he was the most senior of the army officers in Nigeria. Now, Ironsi, I don't know your views about him. People have really been too harsh on him. He was a soldier, not a very educated man. I don't believe he has school certificate. Whatever it is he has. He was now asked to rule this difficult, complex country. Now, put yourself in his position. How would you rule? Democracy? You cannot run a military government as a democracy. So he decided to rule as a central command, which the soldiers understand. Now, that's what they call the Unification Decree, Decree 34, 19. As soon as that decree was announced, the Northerners saw it as an Igbo plot to achieve what they could not achieve from the ballot box. The Igbo have this view of an Igbo exceptionality. I worked out some plot to dominate the whole of Nigeria, make the Yorubas into second-class citizens, make the North into third-class citizens, despite the fact that if you look at the population of the Igbo, there was no way they could have done that. They're just not big enough. They didn't have money enough or population enough to do that. But somehow everybody believed in this, sort of thing. Within 6 months, everything unhinged. They felt that the Igbos now were dominating Nigeria. So in May, they massacred Igbo army officers. That's the first genocide. There were many people who were killed. Ojukwu then, who had taken control of the East during the crisis, persuaded the Igbos to go back, to the North. They did go back, and he has ever regretted that, decision. July 1966, there was what we call return march in Nigerian politics. The first march was the Igbos killing the Northerners. Now, if you look at this killing, actually, only 6 Nigerian army officers were killed. How were their names? And you thought it was thousands and thousands of people massacred. 6. The only thing you can say about the first coup, that no major Igbo person died, except one individual, a captain, who refused to hand over the key to the armory. He was a lieutenant colonel. Whoever. Okay, then we can.
The key thing is not true. He couldn't have had the key. The lieutenant colonel.
Well, that's what the document.
That's what they say. It is not true.
Okay, we'll come to that.
Oh, well, yeah.
But that's what the documents. That's what the document said, and he was the only one actually who was, killed, as a result. The argument then is, how come no serious Igbo person died? Sardana Sokoto died. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa died. Akintola died. Azikiwe did not die. And Osadebe of the Midwest did not die. Well, Azikiwe has this idea of this tendency to disappear from a country whenever there's trouble. He was always going on some medical treatment of some sort. And then it was argued that he may have had wind of the coup and then fled. So when I was in Dublin, I used to, Opera used to be here. After he was deposed, he was a student at Trinity, studying in internal medicine. So when I came to visit Patricia's people, I hooked up with him. In fact, I introduced him to my mother-in-law. He used to give us, tea or something like that. And I used to walk with him. And I asked him, "Nai, don't be angry." And Nai is a trauma of our father. Don't be angry. Why are you alive? Everybody died except you. Why? It wasn't an easy thing to do. Because I knew that when I was in East Africa and giving speeches, everybody was asking me this question, and I didn't have an answer. Then he told me his reason why he was alive. He said on the night of the coup, Archbishop Macarius was on a state visit to Enugu, and then he got a call. And his driver knocked and told him there was a coup in the offing. I said, how would a driver know about a coup in the offing? He said that we'll be surprised to know what drivers know. Like the village wine tapas in Iboland. That he had it from another driver. So what he did was to pack a few things. If he was alive, he would testify to what I'm saying. Packed a few things and went and stayed with Archbishop Macarius. And there then to come and pluck him from the presence of a visiting head of state. By the following day, the coup was over. There was nothing now you could do to Iransi. They were held in detention, led to the airport. Archbishop left himself and Ibiam, Ibiam, were the ones who were arrested. They were finally released. I said, but why did they release you? He said, they had to release me because the coup had failed. You see, the guys who took power in the north were unable to link with their people in Lagos to complete, the coup. So the majors fled all over, all over the place. What of the Midwest? Why was there no coup in the Midwest? Why was Dennis Osadebe alive, who is an Igbo? He said there were no military detachments in the Midwest. I didn't know that. They had no military, who could have taken charge, of that, particular, place. I said, well, this is Opera's story. The people may believe it. How many? 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. The people may believe it or not, believe it. Then after that, there was this Kampala meeting, which I was present. She was at a Kampala meeting, to make peace, in 19, that was, what period was that? Oh, that's 68. No, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. That was Aburi. Yes, that was Aburi. They had to go to Aburi to make peace. Well, the peace failed. Why did the peace fail? Nigeria were not prepared. They didn't do their research. They came totally unprepared. Ojukwu was so prepared to the last detail. And he insisted, and Ankara actually insisted, and Ojukwu agreed, that the proceedings will be tape recorded and made into long playing records, something like that. You see? Nigerians agreed to everything that Ojukwu said. And everything was signed, delivered. As soon as they got back to Lagos, the story changed. And the Biafra case now was, on Aburi we stand. It's a detailed, all the documentations are in my book, all the details, this is my book. And then when that didn't solve the problem, the last ditch, Najib Gawan decided on his own, with advice of his people, to divide Nigeria into 12 states. No consultation with the East. All the oil-producing states in Igbo land, practically all of them, were now carved out and given to rivers. Even Ebema, which is Igbo land, 4 of the major oil-producing areas still belong to River State. Obi-Igbo, which means the heartland of Igbo, right, or the abode of Igbo, whatever it is, in Ungwa area, in the Aba area, was carved out and given to. So Igbo land became like Germany, encircled, without access to the sea, without anything. It was there and then that Ojukwu decided to call an assembly of Igbo people and put it to them. Do you want to go back to Nigeria, to remain in Nigeria, or do you want to secede? If you secede, look at the difficulties you're going to face. If you go back to Nigeria, look at the difficulties you are going to face. Finally, the committee gave him the mandate, to secede. And they declared, the secession. And the argument was, nothing serious. Within 1 or 2 weeks, we polish them off, and the Biafra will be a lost cause. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I took more time.